75 Hard Summary. 75 Hard is a fitness challenge and book that teaches mental toughness by making you commit to 5 daily critical tasks for 75 days straight, including drinking a gallon of water, reading 10 pages of a non-fiction book, doing 2 45-minute workouts, taking a progress picture, and following a diet. A few months ago, my sister randomly texted me and said, "I just listened to a podcast you might be interested in." She then sent me the link to Andy Frisella's Real AF podcast, where he talks about the 75 Hard Mental Toughness Challenge. Fast forward to just a few weeks ago, and I was completing my last day of the challenge. My only regret was that I hadn't started sooner. This thing is one of the hardest, most life-changing things I've ever done, and it's a ton of fun. It gets you out of your comfort zone and in ways that you can't imagine. And it brings out the boss inside of you that you've always wished would take charge. But, most of all, it's a pathway to building consistent mental toughness, which is the ability to stick to the right things even when you don't feel like it. The challenge involves completing 5 critical tasks every day for 75 days straight, including: take a progress picture, drink a gallon of water, complete 2 45-minute workouts, one of which has to be outside, follow a diet, and no cheat meals, read 10 pages of a non-fiction book. After doing all of these myself for 75 days in a row, I can say that it's 100% something you should consider yourself if you want to develop mental toughness. And one of the best ways to learn about it is Andy's book called 75 Hard, a tactical guide to winning the war with yourself. Here are 3 of the greatest lessons I've learned from this book and challenge. The purpose of 75 Hard is to develop mental toughness, which is the key to getting happiness and anything you want in life. To complete the 75 Hard challenge, you must follow 5 critical tasks for 75 days straight and start over if you miss even one. There are 8 eras of the challenge that you must be aware of and prepared for if you want to complete it. Let's get into it and start developing mental toughness. Lesson 1. The key to happiness and getting anything you want is mental toughness, which is why Andy Frisella created 75 Hard. Andy Frisella didn't have that exciting of a childhood, but he did have a supportive father who taught him mental toughness. This lesson would help Andy go on to put in years of effort to build a massively successful business. All seemed to be going well until the night he almost lost his life. Andy was walking back from a club and heard a guy in a car yelling racial slurs at one of Andy's friends. Andy confronted him about it, but when he started walking away, the man attacked. Multiple stab wounds to the face left Andy bleeding out, but he miraculously survived. The pain left, but the scars didn't. It was embarrassing for him to have people asking about it all the time, and he wanted to give up. Then one day, after talking with a woman who also had scars on her face, he decided his pity party was over. Instead, Andy began a podcast to share his business and life lessons. One day he had a guest that had completed 50 Ironmans in 50 days in all 50 states. He taught Andy that the key to happiness and success is mental toughness, and you get it intentionally putting yourself into uncomfortable situations. Andy had always wanted to teach others how to be mentally tough, and this guest's words led him to create the 75 Hard challenge to make it happen. Lesson 2. There are 5 critical tasks to complete every day for 75 days straight to complete the 75 Hard challenge. If you want to get mental toughness to get whatever you want out of life, you should take the 75 Hard challenge. The first critical task is to commit to a diet. This can be anything designed to improve your health, but you must stick to it and no cheat meals. Of course, this also means no alcohol. Critical task number 2 is drinking a gallon of water a day. Wherever you find water, you find life, and you can remember this as a symbol that you're doing this because you want your life to flourish. The next critical task is to complete 2 45-minute workouts. One of them has to be outside. Some days I just had to walk for my workouts, but that still counts. The fourth critical task is reading 10 pages of a non-fiction book that will improve your life. Audiobooks don't count, but you can use e-readers. And finally, critical task number 5 is to take a progress picture. This is the one that most people miss simply because they forget. So set a reminder and do it at the same time every day. Oh, and if you miss one of these, you have to start over. Lesson 3. To finish the challenge, you need to be aware of and prepared for the 8 eras of it. In the first 7 to 10 days of 75 Hard, you're going to feel excited and learn a ton. I started realizing things about myself, my habits, and my excuses that I hadn't ever considered, and it helped me improve. Days 8 to 14 are ones of discovery, discipline, and the danger zone. You'll begin valuing your time better. You will wonder why you thought you couldn't push yourself harder, and the initial excitement will wear off. The next 15 to 21 days are marked by exterminating excuses, growing exponentially, and quitting, for some. During days 22 to 28, you'll start to experience massive transformation and the moment of manifestation. Like a superhero, you're going to start seeing yourself changing into something amazing. Days 29 to 35 are where you start to get so focused that you enter the flow state. You begin growing fearless. In between day 36 and day 49, you'll feel aligned with your true self and start to experience automation as you anticipate the end. From day 50 to day 63, You'll reach a level of expertise but also start to have a dip in excitement. And finally, from day 64 to the end, you're entering God mode where you can't lose. You'll reach peak mental toughness and be able to apply it to anything in your life. This book and the challenge that goes with it are life-changing. It really can be as simple as committing to critical tasks for 75 days straight to gain mental toughness. Heads up, though, this book isn't the most eloquently written. And he curses a lot, which isn't my favorite, but I could look past. A Beautiful Mind summary. Like many people, my first encounter with the fascinating story of John Nash Jr. was when I saw A Beautiful Mind. The movie was very well done, but the story itself was what I found most compelling. John Nash was brilliant, but his antisocial behavior was off-putting to some. Even the colleagues who found him annoying couldn't deny he was going to make a name for himself. Though, tragically, just as his career was taking off, his behavior became more erratic and obsessive. His world came crashing down after his diagnosis with paranoid schizophrenia. The novel A Beautiful Mind chronicles John Nash's decades-long battle with disease and his recovery. Author Sylvia Nasser brings us into the mind of a brilliant man tortured by his inability to distinguish paranoia from reality. Here are the 3 most interesting lessons from this book. John Nash's mathematical brilliance began at a young age, and his graduate work made him a promising up-and-coming academic. Immense stress contributed to his diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia that derailed his career and personal life for decades. Nash's story ends happily with his recovery and career success. Are you excited to learn about one of the most influential and intelligent minds of our time? Let's begin. Lesson 1. The world began to see John Nash's brilliance when he was in graduate school making mathematical breakthroughs. Like many geniuses, John Nash had some eccentric and reclusive tendencies. But though his parents worried about him socially, he had a gift for thinking about math problems in new and unorthodox ways. Surprisingly, he didn't show glowing grades in high school math because he would neglect to show his work and just write an answer that he had solved in his head. But in college, his professors were astounded by his methods for solving difficult math problems with ease, and he was accepted to graduate school at Princeton University. Graduate students formed cliques under different mentoring professors, but Nash preferred to stay a loner, making him not particularly well liked. But he found his place working under John Newman, who fathered game theory. Game theory is a way to explain human decision-making among competing players through mathematical models. Nash expanded Newman's theory in his thesis to include games involving more than 2 players and allowing for cooperation. This crucial step in the development of the theory allowed it to relevant in real-world situations, particularly in economics. Most importantly, his additions to the theory allowed the possibility of mathematically determining human behavior with the possibility of mutual gain. This became known as the Nash equilibrium, which would win him the Nobel Prize, but not until half a century later. His thesis gave him huge recognition in the mathematics field and landed him a job at MIT. It was there that he met his wife Alicia, and things were looking very promising for the young family. Lesson 2. Nash's diagnosis of schizophrenia came after a stressful time in his career and life. When Nash approached the age of 30, he began to be increasingly anxious about not yet receiving tenure and a lack of new mathematical breakthroughs. His anxieties lead him to decide to take on Riemann's hypothesis, a famously hard unsolved math problem. It was when he was putting all of his energy into this that he found out his wife was pregnant. This was when people noticed his increasingly strange behavior. Accusing his colleagues of looking through his trash to see his work on the hypothesis became common for Nash. He began to believe aliens were trying to ruin his career and they were sending secret messages through the paper. Turning down a professorship at the University of Chicago because he was Emperor of Antarctica, it was obvious that Nash was in deep. The tipping point for Alicia came when he went to Washington, D.C., in the middle of the night to give letters to embassies explaining there was an imminent world government. She had him committed to a psychiatric hospital, where he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Nash was treated and given the clear, but it was soon apparent he fabricated this to leave. He wandered to Europe to convince the embassies of his world government but eventually was deported. Nash saw things get worse with his income source gone and Alicia filing for divorce. Living with his family for only a short time, he soon went back to an institution. Lesson 3. His tragic story turned around when he made a seemingly unbelievable recovery and he finally was able to have success. To most everyone around him, all seemed lost. But in a miraculous turn of events, he began to recover. It happened slowly, but the schizophrenia began to subside. By the late 1980s, people at Princeton saw his research was real math rather than incomprehensible equations. Nash himself said that he began to realize that though his paranoid thoughts were still tormenting him, he could reject them now. More wonderful for Nash still, he was finally getting recognition for his contribution to game theory by receiving the Nobel Prize in economics. After around 30 years away from academia, the invitation came for him to be a professor at Princeton. He spent his remaining years reconnecting with family and friends he had estranged and reacquainted himself with Alicia. They remarried in 2001, and they lived out their lives together. What a story. A Beautiful Mind is a great read, especially if you've seen the movie. I enjoy math and it's fascinating to learn more about Nash's contributions to the field and the struggles with mental illness. 10 Days to Faster Reading Summary. 10 Days to Faster Reading helps you bring your reading skills to the current century, even if you've stopped developing them, like most of us, with the end of elementary school, by helping you select what to read in a better way and giving you actionable techniques to read and retain faster and better. 10 Days to Faster Reading is the result of America's #1 speed reading expert teaming up with the Princeton Language Institute. Over the span of 10 days, it encourages you to run various reading experiments, so you can figure out which bad reading habits you have to let go of, which good ones will help you, and what reading techniques you've already mastered. Whether you think you lack the time, the attention, or the memory to properly read, this book gives you a stretch of rope to hold on to and pull yourself out of the hole. Here are 3 lessons to help you become a better reader. Don't just read everything. Be picky and ask some questions first. Preview everything you read. Focus on important keywords to grasp sentences without reading them. Ready to read like a pro? Let's crank up your literary intake. Lesson 1. Be restrictive with what you read by asking these 2 questions. Just like true productivity doesn't mean doing everything, but doing it faster, being a prolific reader doesn't mean reading everything that lands in front of you. The easiest way to read more is to read less of the stuff you don't need to. Reading is food for the mind, and just like a good diet requires you to take responsibility for what you put in your mouth, you'll also have to stand up for what you put in your brain. The authors suggest you ask yourself 2 crucial questions before ever reading anything longer than a tweet. Why am I reading this? Why do I need the information that's in here? The first question helps you figure out if you're just servicing someone else's request, or your own desire of being able to say I have read that ... and quote. For example, just because you failed to read the 2014 industry report for the past 2 years does not make it relevant now, so you might as well toss it. The second one digs into whether you'll actually use what you read. For example, a scientific paper that might help you solve an important problem one of your clients has should probably take precedence over your child's homework review, especially if your kid is already an A student. Lesson 2. Subject everything you're about to read to a preview. It might be enough. This won't work with fiction books, but for everything non-fiction, it helps a lot. By getting an overview of what a book or article is about, you'll get a better sense of the bigger picture and figure out which parts will be relevant for you to read in the first place. Just like you don't have to read everything that ends up in your hands, you don't have to read everything that's in whatever you do decide to read. Here's how. Read the title, foreword and text on the back flap, followed by skimming the index. Then, leaf through the chapters and look at the headings and subheadings. Read the first sentence of paragraphs or chapters that seem interesting. After doing this, you'll already have a good sense of what's about to come, which makes you less likely to have to reread lines and paragraphs as you go through. According to the authors, previewing can give you up to 40% of the information, and sometimes that's all you need. For example, a book like The One Thing has one predominant and specific message, which you can get in 5 minutes flat. That doesn't make the rest of the book bad or unnecessary, but depending on the time and place it might be all you need for now, until you return to the book later. Lesson 3. Focus on important keywords to grasp sentences without reading them. You could look at the entire lesson above and instantly tell me what its core takeaway is, without reading a single sentence. Why is that? Because I've bolded the most important keywords. Just by taking a glimpse at the paragraph above, you'd instantly recognize that looking at title, foreword, back flap text and index give you a great preview of a book. Usually, our eyes jump around while reading, but by following a constant stream of keywords, you can read more fluently. These keywords are often longer than 3 letters and carry the meaning of the sentence. This is easier in texts with highlighted parts, like this summary, but with a little training you can employ this method even without particular visual. 10% Happier Summary. 10% Happier gives skeptics an easy into meditation, by taking a very non-fluffy approach to the science behind this mindfulness practice and showing you how and why letting go of your ego is important for living a stress-free life. Life as an ABC News correspondent must feel pretty good, right? The pay is great, millions of people know your face and name, and you get to tell everyone what's important. But for some, the pressure can become too much, and they crack. This happened to Dan Harris 12 years ago, and his voice broke in a live, on-air panic attack on national television. Convinced that it was time to do some digging into his self and life, he started a long journey into the science of stress and eventually, mindfulness. Originally a skeptic himself, Dan eventually learned to tame his ego with the power of meditation, and shared his lessons in this 2014 bestseller. Here are 3 lessons to show you why your ego causes problems, that letting it go won't make you lose your touch, and how meditation helps with this process. The problem with your ego is that it's never satisfied. Be simple, not a simpleton. Why letting go of your ego won't make you a pushover. Meditation increases your mindfulness and compassion by giving you a 4th habitual response. Ready to crank up your happiness by at least 10%? Let's go. Lesson 1. Your ego gets in the way of your happiness by constantly wanting more. The friction between acting in the present, but constantly thinking about the future and past is what causes your ego to be impossible to satisfy. This issue is also addressed in The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle in a very similar manner. Dan Harris says your ego constantly assesses your worth by looking at your own wealth, looks and social status, and then finding the next best person with more of it to compare it against. Therefore, your ego's default setting is more. The minute you feed your ego a new achievement, toy or compliment, the baseline for desire is reset and it starts looking for the next thing. It thrives on drama and worry, and will instantly look for the next bigger achievement to compare yourself to, and if none is there, dig up some ancient problem or crisis and pester you with it. That's why the ego is never happy, and it's up to you to take charge of that, because no matter which new heights you reach, it'll never be enough. Time to rein it in. Lesson 2, be simple, not a simpleton. Why letting go of your ego won't make you a pushover. Now you might say, if my ego is my drive to achieve greater things, won't I lose my edge if I completely let go of it? And quote. Nope. That doesn't have to be the case at all. To the contrary, often people overdo it with the Buddhist attitude of letting go and in some cases even end up not letting themselves orgasm during sex or letting other people order for them at restaurants in order not to express personal preference. That's just stupid. As Indian meditation teacher Munindra taught his students to keep things simple and easy, one of them approached him when he was fiercely negotiating the price of a bag of peanuts at the local market about how this matched his earlier lesson. Munindra replied, I said be simple, not a simpleton! And quote. Mindfulness just makes you more creative and productive, not a pushover. It removes the need for competition and fuels your drive by removing wrong assumptions and bad thoughts, so instead of the usual stress you'll approach things more clearly, because you're not giving in to aggressive temptations. Dan found himself filling pages upon pages with notes during a meditation retreat, because his mind was less cluttered and chaotic, and his creativity flowed freely. Lesson 3, meditation makes you more mindful and compassionate by giving you a fourth habitual response. So what is it that meditation can help us do to tame the ego and fuel our drive? It makes us more mindful and helps us live in the moment, as well as act more compassionately towards others. Meditation achieves this by giving you a fourth habitual response. According to ancient Buddhist wisdom, we usually exhibit 3 characteristic habitual responses to all of our experiences. We want it. Ever passed by a hamburger place when you were hungry? Yeah, that. We reject it. Did a spider ever land on your hand? You probably instantly threw it off. We zone out. I bet you always listen to the flight attendant's safety instructions all the way to the end too. Yeah, right. But once you start meditating properly, you'll be able to choose a fourth alternative, observing, without judging. It usually starts with physical pain, and you notice when your legs are sore or your nose itches, but you can resist the urge to scratch it and just let it be. But after a while, this transfers to your emotions and thoughts as well. You'll catch yourself while gossiping, acting out on a bad habit, or when you're thinking negative thoughts, and can just observe your feelings until they pass by, without reacting to them. It's this little pause between thinking and acting that makes you realize often no action is necessary and thus helps you make better choices altogether. A Beginner's Guide to the End Summary. A Beginner's Guide to the End is your guide to using the principles of stillness, cleaning, and grief to prepare for your own or a loved one's death. It's something that's often in the top fears of people. Nobody wants to talk or even think about it. The subject has the power to take our breath away, paralyzing our thoughts. I'm talking about death. Whether you choose to think about it or not, you and those you love will die someday. I don't say that to be morbid, but rather because acknowledging and talking about it actually makes death a little easier. That's because knowing what to expect helps you not be so blindsided when it finally comes for you. B.J. Miller and Shoshana Berger's A Beginner's Guide to the End. Practical advice for living life and facing death contains the advice you need to prepare for death. Although it may sound intimidating to think about death, I promise that doing so will help you live a better life. Here are the 3 most helpful lessons about preparing for death that I've learned from this book. Take time for yourself when you receive the news that you have a terminal illness. Prepare for death by cleaning out your stuff, reconciling any secrets or regrets, and leaving something meaningful for your loved ones. When one of your loved ones dies, don't pressure yourself right after. Let the grief come and go without resistance. Are you ready to have some of your fears about death squashed by learning some ways to prepare for it? Let's begin. Lesson 1. After learning of your own terminal illness, it's best to take things slow. All 4 of my grandparents had cancer at some point. About 10 years ago my dad got it, too. Receiving the news really shook me up. I had to take the time to process what was happening so I could function properly. It's a gut-wrenching event that most can't get a grasp on at first. You're not a bad person for needing time to take it all in and stabilize yourself. When I got the news about my dad, I was halfway across the world. I remember going to the beach and walking along the shore of the Isle of Man where I lived at the time, just thinking, after learning of a terminal illness, it's best to take some time to relax somewhere that you feel the safest and comfortable. Once you feel that you've come to terms enough to do so, call your family and friends. They will be the most supportive and help you get through this. It's much better to do it with their help than trying to deal with it alone. Make sure to focus on them and not outside sources like the internet. Googling your condition isn't a great idea at this point. Additionally, don't try quitting smoking, drinking, binging on chocolate, or whatever coping mechanism you've got. Find relief in whatever makes it easier to deal with it. Avoid dramatic decisions, and don't commit to any treatment until you can think more clearly. Lesson 2. Take care of your secrets and stuff before dying, and make sure you'll leave something meaningful to those you love most. When you die, you'll take nothing with you. So clean up after yourself to not leave so much for your family to take care of after you're gone. Give your relatives the gift of being able to focus solely on you after you go, instead of having to clean out your attic. It also helps your loved ones to leave behind meaningful items, like a letter for them to read in the future. Also, throw away the junk. Only leave what you want to pass down. When one of my grandmas had terminal cancer, she would put a piece of tape on items and write the name of the person to whom she wanted it to go. That made things a lot easier for all of us after she was gone. You'll also want to make sure and reveal any big secrets and clean up any regrets or hard feelings. It's painful for children to learn about an affair and half-sibling only after your death. And even though the pain you've caused others may not affect you after you're gone, it sticks with those who you leave. That's why it's vital to say things like "I'm sorry" and "I love you." And quote. Lesson 3. Give yourself a break and let grief come and go like a wave when someone close to you dies. My dad and his parents all survived cancer. My other 2 grandparents weren't so lucky. My mom's dad succumbed to his illness before I was born, but I still remember when her mom died. It was shockingly painful. The best thing to do for me is what anyone should do after a loved one dies: focus on gentle self-care. You can and must take time to grieve. It's okay to cry, get angry, or do whatever your feelings dictate. Think of it like letting a wave washing over you. My mom once told me that when my grandpa died, all of her siblings handled it differently. One punched a hole in the wall. Another held it all in until watching The Lion King and then cried like a baby. You do what works best for you, and don't be afraid of emotion. Immediately after your loss, there will be some official tasks to complete in preparation for the funeral. Other than this, don't pressure yourself. Do whatever makes you feel at peace. Whether it's binge watching your favorite shows on Netflix or eating ice cream, do it. Don't demand too much of yourself. When my dad's mom died, I was right in the middle of my first grad school class. I had homework and an upcoming test. On the day of her funeral, I went fishing with my cousins instead of worrying about all I had to do. I didn't even complete the homework assignment. It helped me cope and get back on my feet sooner. A Brief History of Everyone Who Ever Lived Summary. A brief history of everyone who ever lived gives you another important perspective on mankind's past and present through the lens of our genes. Have you ever wished you could go back in time? Maybe to ancient Rome, or to see how the Great Pyramids were built? Science may not have come far enough to grant us these wishes in the form of a time machine. But genetic science can give us an incredible picture of our past that we didn't know before. Do you want to know how cultures were developed? Or where race began? What about where and how humans migrated across the globe? All these questions, and many more, can be unlocked with genetic advances. In A Brief History of Everyone Who Ever Lived, the human story retold through our genes, we get the whole story of human history, as told by our genes. Adam Rutherford dives into our past and the evolution of our species. The further we go back, it's easy to see misconceptions we have about race and society, and we find that we are all much more alike than we ever thought. And using this fascinating genetic past, we can shed light on humanity's future. Here are the 3 most interesting lessons about the human story. The genes of Homo sapiens can change depending on the environment and culture. You and I are descendants of royalty. Deciphering the entire 3 billion letters of the human genome took 8 years but taught us a lot about ourselves. Are you ready to get a better understanding of what's in your genes? Let's go. Lesson 1. Human culture and the environment can affect our genes as they did so for our ancient ancestors. Did you know changes in human culture can be found in our genes? Take milk, for example. While some people enjoy it on a daily basis, most adults are actually lactose intolerant. Have you ever wondered why? The enzyme responsible for breaking down lactose, lactase, is coded into our genes and actually disappears after we are infants. But somewhere along the line, a mutation resulted in it staying throughout adult life. This happened in Europeans, and this is why those of European ancestry were able to enjoy milk, which led to the cultural practice of dairy farming. Other groups in Africa and Asia also developed the ability to keep lactase. It's likely these genes mutated because it was evolutionarily advantageous to be able to digest lactose. Environment can also change our genes. It's thought that all humans originated from Africa, and everyone had dark skin. The people that migrated to Europe 50,000 years ago also had dark skin. How did they end up with the lighter skin they have today? Dark skin was an adaptation to the sunny weather. We can see that the people who migrated to Sweden had a change in their skin around 7,700 years ago. Their genes acted together to produce lighter hair, skin, and eyes as an adaptation to less light. Lesson 2. Royalty is in the family tree of everyone on Earth. If you're like me, you may have seen your family tree trace back to someone royal, like Charlemagne. Pretty impressive, right? Sorry to burst your bubble, but everyone's lineage traces back to royalty. And here's why. Joseph Chang, a statistician at Yale, looked at ancestry through numbers. He wanted to find how far back you needed to go to find a common ancestor for all Europeans. The answer? Just 600 years. Every European line crosses around the time of Richard II of England. It seems impossible considering the amount of Europeans alive today because they must have billions and billions of ancestors, right? Well, there weren't that many Europeans just 1,000 years ago. Every European that is alive today descended from literally every person that was alive in the 9th century. Many of those people fill multiple spots on a family tree, and so Charlemagne, who fathered 18 children, is on every tree of Europeans alive today. Similarly, Genghis Khan is a common ancestor on all Asian family trees, and Nefertiti is the same for Africans. All across the world, on every family tree, everyone is related to some ancient royalty. Lesson 3, we understand a lot more about the human genome after deciphering it in the year 2000. It was relatively recently, the year 2000, that we were finally able to decipher the human genome. It took 8 years to read the 3 billion letters of the human genetic code, and was truly a groundbreaking feat. We learned many exciting and fascinating things about the code that makes us who we are. Scientists guessed we had more than 100,000 genes when in reality, we have just 20,000. But what's perhaps even crazier is that a banana has even more genes than us. Did you know that most of our DNA serves no purpose whatsoever? According to scientists, only 2% of our genes are actually readable. The rest are known as junk DNA that is incomprehensible. But we're not totally sure yet whether or not it serves a purpose. Another fascinating discovery was just how complex interactions between our genes are. Researchers first believed that a specific gene was code for a specific outcome, like a disease. But now we know that this isn't the case. Our genes interact in complicated ways, and 10 to hundreds of them are actually what play a role in disease. A Crack in Creation Summary. A Crack in Creation will teach you all about the power of gene editing that is made possible with CRISPR by detailing how it works, the benefits and opportunities it opens up, and the ethical risks of using it on humans. We live in a day of superhero movies where we see scrawny young men go into a machine and come out super soldiers. It seems like science fiction to think that a similar improvement to the human condition could be possible. But we also are in a time of amazing technological and medical advancements that now make the idea of a real-life Captain America not so far-fetched. CRISPR is a region of repeated DNA in bacteria that, according to new research, has wild possibilities for improving our lives. From eliminating diseases to helping us create healthier food, this new opportunity can help us do it all. This is what you'll learn about in A Crack in Creation: gene editing and the unthinkable power to control evolution. You're going to be blown away by some of the amazing genetic advances that author Jennifer Doudna's research may allow. Here are the 3 most amazing lessons this book taught me about gene editing. CRISPR is a process that happens naturally in bacteria, and scientists have found out how to use it on humans. The ability to edit genes can significantly enhance our way of life by how it affects agriculture and the prevalence of diseases common to mankind. As exciting as this new opportunity is, there are some questions and implications that we need to work out before we go further. Get ready for your mind to be blown by some really fascinating breakthrough science. Let's get started. Lesson 1. Scientists have found a way to utilize the natural phenomenon of CRISPR that happens in bacteria. The acronym CRISPR stands for Clustered Regularly Interspaced Short Palindromic Repeats. Sounds complex, right? Think of it more simply as a part of bacterial DNA that lets us cut and modify genes as we please. To understand how this all works, you need to know about 3 parts that allow these bacteria to cut through virus DNA to fight it. CRISPR-associated, or Cas gene, specifically the Cas9 gene. CRISPR. Each of these 3 components has an important role in what bacteria does to modify DNA. The Cas9 gene lets the bacteria cut through virus DNA to disable its effects. It knows where to slice because CRISPR RNA acts as a messenger to tell Cas9 where to go make the snip. Last we have trachRNA, which turns on the cutting action. So we know that this happens naturally in our world, all around us, all the time. The next question researchers asked was whether they could use CRISPR to cut specific DNA in a lab. And it turns out this is possible. When CRISPR makes its slice, there's a space right afterward that the body begins to repair itself. Utilizing that opportunity, scientists can insert whatever DNA sequence they want to, which modifies the traits of the organism. Thus, we can change whatever we desire to be different about our genes. This can upgrade many aspects of our lives, as we're about to see. Lesson 2. We can use gene editing to grow healthier crops and eliminate some diseases. Let's take a look at some of the practical applications of this tool. The ability to modify genes gives us a chance to create crops that produce more, resist sickness, and are healthier. The citrus industry, for example, has a problem with what's called yellow dragon disease. Utilizing gene editing, we could end the decimation of plantations in Asia that this plague causes. We can also modify our food to be better for us, like taking trans fats out of soybean oil, for example. Some pigs in Canada have already been genetically modified to have better digestion. This reduces phosphorus in their waste that causes algal blooms that kill aquatic animals. For humans, we've got over 7,000 diseases that result from a single gene mutation each. All of these could be gone with CRISPR. Even HIV, which affects millions around the world, may be preventable with gene editing. It could also find a cure for fatal diseases like muscular dystrophy. This amazing new tool even has a chance at stopping cancer entirely. Because DNA mutations cause cancer, the ability to cut and modify DNA might be able to stop it. All of this sounds amazing, but there are some roadblocks to this nearly sickness-free world you're imagining. Lesson 3. Although this new breakthrough sounds all good, we must answer some questions and ethical implications about it. The author's breakthrough research was going well in 2014 when an entrepreneur had an interesting pitch to co-author Samuel Sternberg. They wanted him to help create a CRISPR baby. Sternberg declined this offer, but this began a string of ethical questions about gene editing that we still need to answer. Is it ethically okay to use something like this to choose a baby's gender or modify it to be stronger or prettier? Concerns began to arise in the author's mind about someone abusing CRISPR. It got so bad at one point that she once had a dream that she met Adolf Hitler, who asked about the process. The thought of a psychopath like him getting this technology terrified Doudna. Doudna suggests reviewing 3 themes as we figure out the next steps of gene editing technology. The first is safety, which she feels will soon be taken care of as the science of CRISPR advances. Next is the ethical component. While eliminating diseases is amazing, some might wonder why we should stop there. It may not be long before unregulated gene editing allows people, mostly the rich, to buy better bodies for themselves. Which brings us to our last point of the regulations that governments must make. This has already begun with an international summit on human gene editing back in 2015. We can only hope that meetings like this one will continue to progress efforts to enforce limits. I for one hope that we will soon see a time when we can use CRISPR to make a better world for all of us. A Curious Mind Summary. A curious mind is an homage to the power of asking questions, showing you how being curious can change your entire life, from the way you do business, to how you interact with your loved ones, or even shape your country. When I say Brian Grazer, does that ring a bell? It didn't for me at first, I have to admit. Maybe the title of this book reminds you of something. A Curious Mind. No? A Beautiful Mind maybe? You know, the movie about the brilliance of economics Nobel Prize winner John Nash, who invented the field of game theory, but suffered from severe schizophrenia. The one that won the Academy Award for Best Picture, and 3 others? Yup, Brian Grazer produced that. He also produced movies like 8 Mile, Frost/Nixon, Apollo 13 and the world-famous TV show 24, starring Kiefer Sutherland as Jack Bauer. In 2015, Brian asked himself what the root of his success was. He determined that the answer was curiosity. To share how it shaped his life in ways he'd never imagined, and how it can potentially transform yours, he co-wrote A Curious Mind with journalist Charles Fishman. Here are 3 lessons about curiosity that'll hopefully make you want to ask a lot more questions. In business, whoever is the most curious, wins. Everyone loves being asked questions, and that includes the people closest to you. Sometimes you gotta know when to stop asking and start doing. Would you like to take a peek into the mind that made A Beautiful Mind? Today's your lucky day. Lesson 1. A rule of business is that whoever's the most curious, wins. Most people will tell you that business is hard, that it's competitive, that you have to get your elbows out, toughen up, and try to overtake whoever's in front of you. But that's not true. You can take a much more cooperative approach, one that's based on collaboration, not competition, and still win. In fact, Brian Grazer would probably say, whoever's the most curious, wins. Curiosity not only fosters cooperation, but also connection. If you're genuinely curious about your employees' lives, you'll ask them questions accordingly. This way, Brian leads mostly by asking questions, instead of giving orders. Vice versa, his employees are supposed to ask him many questions also. When you're curious, people can explain and reflect on their work themselves. This kind of meaningful conversation leads to bigger and better breakthroughs than a mere do this now approach. The same holds true for your customers. Who would you rather buy a car from? The dealer who just touts his latest offers and how great the cars are, or someone who asks you why you want to buy a car, what you need it for, where you'll go with it, and what you're looking for? The only way to satisfy your customer is to find out exactly what they want in each case and then serve them the best way you can, and you can't do that without being curious. Lesson 2. Everyone loves being asked and answering questions, including your loved ones. I recently thought about how much I know about my parents' childhoods. As it turns out, it's not too much. Sure, I know where they went to school and a couple big milestones, but teenage life is long. There's so much I still have to ask them. Think about someone you've known most or all of your life. How much do you really know about them? Chances are there's still tons left to discover. By showing interest, you can improve your relationships even with the best of your friends and loved ones. Most couples eventually fall into a rut. Hey, how was your day? Good. And then TV takes over. Saving a deteriorating relationship from falling apart can be as simple as remembering one specific thing your partner told you and then asking them about it. Hey, how'd the presentation go today? Were you nervous? Shows you remember and are curious about how their story evolves. Similarly, questions make you much better at connecting with people. Everyone loves being asked questions and to talk about themselves, so instead of rambling about yourself at the next party, start asking new people all about their story. Where did you grow up? What do you do for a living? How do you like it? As in business, so in life, curiosity connects. Lesson 3. When it's time to stop asking and start doing, keep a seal on your curiosity. Being curious is a great mode to be in 90% of the time. But sometimes, it's time to flip the switch and become anti-curious for a while. For example, after Brian Grazer had the idea for the TV show 24 from one of his many curiosity conversations, weekly meetings with professionals from all kinds of fields, he had to switch and commit to now bringing the show to life. Similarly, his expertise in the film industry now tells him when he's found a movie that deserves to be made, even if it's not going to be a mass hit. Frost/Nixon and Rush are great examples of such movies. They were well written, and the stories of the post-Watergate Nixon interviews and Niki Lauda and James Hunt's Formula One rivalry in the 70s deserve to be told. So Brian went ahead and made them, ignoring what people told him. He had to tone down his curiosity for a while, but in the end both movies got a lot of critical acclaim, in spite of not being commercial successes. People throw a lot of ideas at me. Features for 4-minute books, products to create, posts to write. I'm always open to hearing them, but often I have to note them down and return to them later, so I can focus on writing the summaries, which are my commitment for the year. The only way to create something of value is to ignore new ideas every now and then. It's up to you to know when that is.